Hi, I'm Violet Brackman.
And I'm Lawson Dunford.
Hi, I'm Sam Power.
And I'm Luke Mazer.
And welcome back to Manon Dejour.
All right, today on Manon Dejour, we will be discussing David Lynch's film A Lost Highway, which was done in 1997 and is a neo-noir mystery/thriller film. The story follows the main character, Fred Madison, who is a jazz musician, who ends up going crazy and kills his wife, Renee, after he thinks that she has an affair with Dick Laurent, who is like a gangster. His story intertwines with a young man named Pete, who is a mechanic, who is kind of like a fantasy version of himself.
So should we start going over what we all thought of the film?
Yep,
Sure.
yeah.
Personally, as someone who's followed David Lynch's work, this is actually one of my favorite movies that I've seen of his. I thought that I watched it twice, once to just experience it without thinking too hard. Second time to be like, okay, what the fuck did I just watch? I need to kind of like figure it out now. And I think that it was just really fun to watch because you really had to. And I thought there's so many things that were like so beautifully done in it as well. Like there are a lot of things that I was like, wow, this is like great. Like I love this scene and I want to be here right now in the scene experiencing like the emotion that he's making me feel.
Coming from the opposite end of the spectrum, I knew nothing of David Lynch going into the movie. And after finishing it, I was left pretty confused. I had to go back and rewatch a lot of it to try and like fully grasp it. But even not understanding it, I still found it enjoyable after the first time. And then once I went back and rewatched it, I found it way more enjoyable. So
Yeah, similar to Luke, I also knew nothing about David Lynch. However, after watching that film, I kind of want to watch more David Lynch films because I kind of liked his style and like the mystery and everything. It was a really interesting film. I enjoyed it, even though I was very confused the whole time. I had so many questions, but I really enjoyed it, and I could definitely see watching another David Lynch film or rewatching this one many times to try to get more perspective on it.
So, similar to Luke and Sam, I'm not very familiar with David Lynch either. So naturally, when Violet suggested this movie, I went to watch the trailer and I was like, okay, this looks like a really cool movie. Like, I could definitely get down with this. And then I started watching it and realized it was nothing like the trailer at all. Like, it was very suspenseful. I always felt like something was going to jump out and like scare me because you could feel the tension throughout the entire film, just like with the way that he edited and with the way that he shot. So overall, I really liked the movie. And it still doesn't really make sense to me. So yeah.
So before unpacking the film, we want to mention that the film does not go by any human conception of a timeline. So the fact that the beginning of the movie and the end of the movie is subsequently the end of the movie and the beginning of the movie, and it's over before it really starts. So a lot of what we talk about is kind of like perception based and understanding how the story goes when it's kind of hard to even grasp the story is. So I think we should start at the beginning, which the movie starts off, you're in this kind of point of view shot where you are this car driving down this highway. So what did you guys think of that like starting shot?
I personally I always thought those shots with the highway and like of the car lights and stuff, I thought they were really cool. Just the camera angle, and just being like positioned as like a car. I thought that was really interesting. and it kind of just gave like a ominous, like kind of spooky, like sense of like I had no idea what was gonna happen, what was going on with the highway, why was the car driving in the middle of the highway? I don't know. It was interesting.
For me, I feel like it's kind of funny because it almost is as if like you are the car driving down the highway and you have no idea where it's going. You're in the middle of the road. It's like nothing really makes sense. You can't see anything around you. And while I was watching the movie, I could identify with that car a lot because I kind of didn't really know where he was going with all this, and I kind of felt like I was in the dark. And overall, it was just like, honestly, like that scene produced a type of hysteria, I feel like, that was replicated throughout the entire film. So
Yeah, I loved it. My favorite thing about it is the fact that in some ways I didn't feel like I was a car, but I felt like I was a person running down the highway.
that is a
It's
great
very
movie.
disoriented and like kind of not really like shaky cam, but kind of this like swerving cam made me feel like I was running aimlessly from something,
Mm.
which I really loved. And something that's really important to this movie is the music choices that Lynch made. This was actually a huge hit, the soundtrack to this. And people bought the soundtrack, and it was like there are a lot of really famous people on this soundtrack and a couple of really big songs in like the jazz world and the rock world. Um, Marilyn Manson's on it, Smashing Pumpkins is on it, um, David Bowie's on it, and David Bowie's song Deranged, which plays while you're going down this highway, both in the beginning of the film and the end of the film. I thought that this song just explains so much of the movie, and kind of really explains the tone of it. And deranged, which kind of already clues you into the fact that the main character, Fred, is clearly deranged and struggles with mental issues, and that the movie you're gonna watch is not of sane and sound mind. And he's saying like, "Cruise me, cruise me, cruise me, baby," as you have this feeling of running along the highway. Um, and then he also says, "As the rain sets in, it's the angel man. I'm deranged." And I thought this kind of represented the mystery man, who I'm not sure if he's like a demon or an angel, but it points out that like there's something deranged happening with this like guy who's this mysterious man. And then also lastly, it says the song ends as it cuts to the beginning of the film, and it says um, the clutch of life. And I thought that was really interesting because it's kind of like this duo between life clutching onto you, but also it feels like Fred is kind of clutching onto life throughout the film. So I thought that was really interesting.
Definitely. Um, yeah, I think that it's interesting that you say that you compared the mystery man to an angel. The angel in the deranged song. Because like honestly, like I was confused as to what that character was supposed to represent. But I almost feel like he had so obviously there was like a fantasy world that we were experiencing and also reality like simultaneously, which was demonstrated through, I mean, like the demon saying he was both in the house and he was talking to him, like, but you know what I mean? It was interesting, but I kind of like thought he might have been schizophrenic or something along those lines, which might be a reason why like our time was distorted, because I feel like we were viewing the movie through the lens of the protagonist.
Yeah, definitely. There's that line that I'm sure resonated with all three of you, as it did with me, where he says, I like to remember things my own way. And the detective is like, what do you mean by that? And he says, I remember them not necessarily how they happened, but how he wants to remember them. And I think that's like a really good point, Lawson, and that like kind of explains it. Like you see his warped perspective from his psychosis, instead of like maybe if we were given it from the perspective of the police officers or the perspective of Renee or the perspective of someone outside of his psychosis and his kind of mental instability, I think the story would be a lot different.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That quote, I feel like, just resonates with the whole movie. It kind of explains like the premise of the movie in some ways, because it's like you almost have like an unreliable narrator with like fantasy and reality, and that whole movie is just based on like seeing this movie as like a fantasy, like, and everything like that. So I think that quote about not remembering things or remembering how he wants it to be remembered is really important to understanding what David Lynch was kind of trying to portray in this film.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you say um, you kind of questioning if he's a narrator that you can trust, because I often found myself wondering like if Renee is really having an affair. And I feel like Lynch did such a good job of giving so many small, very intricate things that kind of make you in some way trust him on it, even if you realize that he is crazy. One of the main things was like her clothing. When we're in the perspective of Fred and you're watching Renee, oftentimes she's shown in very long, very modest black and dark brown clothing with black lipstick or brown lipstick. But right in the beginning, when she's like, "Sorry, I'm not coming to the club with you," she's wearing a very short spaghetti red dress and red lipstick, and it's kind of like she's always dressed very modestly and very dark and not so provocatively color and like outfit wise when she's with Fred, meaning that there's like not a lot of sexual tension between the two of them. But when he goes out, she's wearing this like very sensual, like sexual thing that's kind of like, why are you wearing that to be at home alone? Like, who's coming to see you wearing that?
Yeah. And I don't know if you guys caught this, but I'm not sure if this is right or not, but I seem to remember while he was playing the saxophone in the club, him making an eyeline match with his spouse or his girlfriend or his wife, and she was with the man that she supposedly had an affair with. So I wasn't sure, like that might have been his schizophrenia, because she said she wasn't going, but also like you said, Violet, like she was wearing the red lipstick, the red dress, which was very out of character for her. So maybe she actually was there, but like Sam said, it's kind of hard to trust the narrator as we're seeing through his eyes when we know that he's clearly out of his mind.
Yeah. Definitely. You see her leave with Andy out of the club.
Mm.
And the interesting thing that I thought about that, which I was also very confused by, is you get that imagery afterwards. It's not necessarily while he's still in the club, it's after he tried to call her and she doesn't pick up when she was supposed to be home. He calls the phone right next to the bed and she doesn't pick up, and he goes home. And so I found that scene very untrustworthy because
Yeah.
I didn't realize I couldn't understand if he didn't realize that was happening and then notices he saw her in the crowd, or if he's like kind of corroborating his own story that she's cheating by thinking that he saw her when he really didn't.
The whole like phone thing is a big part of it. I feel like with um, the scene where, like you said, he calls home and she's not there. But there's a lot of like scenes through the rest of the film that have phones that like people are calling, and I feel like at least for Fred and Renee, it shows like that disconnect between them, along with like when they have the sex scene between them, and there's like no connection between either of them. So I feel like the phones could be in some ways like a symbol of, I don't know, like disconnecting. I don't know. I feel like there might be more there to delve into, but it's definitely something.
One phone scene that I thought was really interesting was when Renee was on the phone talking to the police after they found the videotape, and it's just like a close up of her lips, just describing like the events. And then you see another scene similar to this when like the blonde version of Renee, what's her name? Alice. Yeah, Alice is talking to Pete about like how they need to meet, and it kind of connects Alice and Renee together in a way. It makes you seem like they're like almost the same person.
Yeah, it's that like real extreme close up that's like super personal. And also what I found, I like love the scene where she calls the police and she's like, it's just a extreme close up of her mouth, and it's like someone was in our home, and you can feel the fear of how scary that must be for someone to like send you a video of you asleep, which is such a private and personal matter. Also, Sam, I definitely agree with you. Like, what I kind of thought of the phones is the phones kind of in some ways represent a way of this like interdimensional, it's kind of not really a connection between humans, but more of this connection between the extraterrestrial type interdimensional discussion that this film does have, and like these kind of like subgenres of like demons, angels, dark and light forces and whatever. And that's kind of what I was thinking of like the phones as.
I have a question for you all. So when he's in the cell, and a little to track back a little bit, we talked before when we were figuring out our ideas that we had a hypothesis that the evil man or the mystery man was a demon. So, and it could have been a test that he was testing him to see whether or not he was worthy. But anyways, when he's in the cell, he starts getting these headaches and he starts freaking out and calling the guards. And then we see a snapshot of this house imploding on itself and then reconstructing itself again. And then the evil man walking out and then walking back in, and he's gone. Do you guys think that could have been the evil man or the demon or the mystery man collecting him like he collected the man before at the beginning and end of the movie?
Yeah,
What's significance to that, if there was any?
Actually, when I watched it, I thought that at that moment when he like looks up at that bright light above his cell and you see this blue electricity, I thought that was him dying. He was sentenced to death. He was gonna go in the electric chair. And when he watches the video of him murdering Renee, there's that same blue electricity. And so I thought that was him dying, being electrocuted, and the house blowing up was him dying, and then the house reconstructing was him becoming Pete. And we talked about this earlier outside of our film discussion, that I talked to you guys about David Lynch's other work and The Black Lodge and The Red Room in Twin Peaks. And I thought it was interesting how it's a cabin, and that's very indicative of like the name The Black Lodge, having this cabin in the woods, which is also indicative of Cabin in the Woods, the movie, where all of these evil things come to kill them.
David Lynch?
And so yeah, I think that it was very what?
Is that David Lynch? Cabin in the
No,
Woods?
it's not.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say that would have been a crazy connection.
Yeah, but I thought like the whole fact that it's like this cabin in the woods was very interesting and could connect to other things of David Lynch. But yeah, that's what I thought about that scene. What else?
Didn't we say that color was a huge part of this movie?
Yeah, we were talking about how although color on kind of a base level of like purple is royalty and like red is love, I think that when looking at Lynch's work as a whole, color plays such an important part that you can kind of um, take things out of it that are more realistic to what Lynch intended color to mean in them, more specifically the color red. I know that you guys definitely, there's probably some like powerful red moments that you guys probably like saw in the movie too.
There's a lot of scenes with like a lot of blood, and I feel like it could be just how they used the blood, the fake blood or whatever. But I felt like the blood was always like very vibrant against like other backgrounds. Like
Definitely.
it was more red than it should have been, or than blood is supposed to be. And I don't know if that had anything to do with what you're saying about the symbolism of red, just showing like the popping out of the colors just to symbolize it and accentuate it more.
Yeah.
I feel like this movie was chock full of scenes that were just absolutely jarring. Like the eerie recording of, because the recording had a lot of build up, right? They kept getting tapes in the morning, popping it in, and the killer would get closer and closer and closer to them until we see this absolute massacre with the protagonist on the floor, seemingly the killer. And like the nude scenes were very jarring. Like I feel like he was trying to make a statement with these scenes, like, and it really caught me off guard personally with all these
Yeah.
different scenes.
I said that I think two of the biggest things that I think red represents in Lynch's work is tormentation and choice. I think that a lot of the times that we see red, it's kind of at this point of like where there's a choice that has to happen between good and evil, as well as kind of like when people are going through this very tormented time of like their own mental struggles, there's a lot of red. And I thought that was really interesting, especially like their room in the house has these red velvet curtains, which are exactly like the red velvet curtains that are in the lodge in the Red Room in Twin Peaks, which also represents this kind of waiting room of good and evil. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is there's that scene where Fred tells Renee about a nightmare that he's having, where Renee is calling out and is like, Fred, where are you? And that's not actually a nightmare, but that's actually Renee calling out for Fred the night that he murders her. Because we later see that shot where Fred leaves the room when they get back from the party after he's searched for someone being in the house. And you see Fred like aimlessly walking down the halls, and you see Renee call out, Fred, where are you? Fred. And it's the same exact voiceover that she gives when Fred is like, he looks at this fire and it's like this red raging fire, kind of like the depths of hell. And the smoke comes out. And I thought that that was also like a really interesting scene where we get a lot of things from different perspectives throughout the movie.
Totally. I think that scene it was a very interesting scene. It was like the whole beginning of the movie was very slow. Like we talked about how the dialogue was like nobody really talks like that. Like they wait like 15 seconds before responding to one another. And just like the edits also made it seem like everything was moving in slow motion. But then all of a sudden it cuts from him meandering aimlessly down the hall to this absolutely raging fire. And I think that could also be like indicative of his mental space because we see like how dynamic that is throughout the movie. Like it's constantly shifting. Like 1 second he could be like having a good time at a party, and then the next he could have a schizophrenic episode where he sees the evil face on his spouse. You know, so like I think the fire was also like it was almost I don't want to say foreshadowing because not it wasn't necessarily foreshadowing, but it was definitely giving us a taste of the events that were about to unfold after we witnessed that.
Another shot in that sequence that I really liked is when he's walking down that hallway. He's just walking into the darkness until he's like totally absorbed by it. And I thought that was really striking, and it kind of represented like the evil that he's walking towards when he kills his wife and stuff.
Yeah. Another scene that another shot that I love was there's that shot where Fred watches the video, and at the end of it, there's he gets punched in the face, and it's a cut on action, and so like he starts screaming, and he's like he killed his wife, and then it's like it cuts and it's him getting punched in the face by the cop and being like, "You wife killer."
Yeah.
I thought that was like a really great little bit. I love that. It's like this bloody nose, which has also happened a couple times. When they kill Andy, he gets that like bloody nose and like goes like wandering down the halls where he bumps into Alice, who's wearing the red wig in the red room, and she's having sex with someone that we don't see, and she's like kind of tormenting him.
That cut on action kind of made me think that the whole beginning of the movie was him recounting the events to those police officers. So we're really just seeing his perceived memory, and that's kind of just evidence for that.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what it was supposed to happen, but that's how I took it.
Another scene that I thought was really great was that sax solo that he does when he's at the club.
Yeah. You can't
And
even call it that. I thought it was. I was not very impressed with his saxophone abilities myself.
well, it was more of like he's playing the saxophone and it's so intense it feels like it's like really jarring, and there's the flashing lights and it feels like a mental breakdown, and then he starts to slow down and it feels like breathing, like he's hyperventilating. He's kind of letting out these like slow, like every couple of seconds he lets out a note, but he doesn't breathe throughout the whole thing. It's shot like it's one consecutive um like it's one consecutive shot of him playing the saxophone, even though I'm sure he would have passed out. And then it cuts to white, which seems like he does pass out. So it's like this really intense mental, like straining saxophone solo. And then it cuts to white and it makes you feel like he just like passed out from all of this intensity that he's dealing with, which I thought was like really interesting.
That is so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't even think of the sax solo in that way, of that jarring like comparison to like a mental breakdown. That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. Another music scene that I loved with my whole heart is when Alice comes and she gets out of the car, and what is it? What's the song? Why can't I think of it? You know when she gets out of the car and her and Pete lock eyes, and the two of them lock eyes, and she walks up and the two of them are just like looking at each other and are like really like hooked into each other's eyes, and she's and like he's kind of like, oh, like this like older woman is really like staring at me, and she's kind of like eyeing him down. And I really liked that like moment in the film.
Back to the color real quick. I was just thinking through the scene where Fred walks down the dark hallway um, before Renee dies, and I was just thinking about the beginning of the film compared to like the end of the film, or like when he's Fred and then when he becomes Pete. When he's like Fred, when he's himself, there's a lot of like darkness and like darker shots, like with lighting and stuff like that. And then there's also like the color thing of Renee wearing black a lot of the times. And then it shifts to him being Pete, and like the lighting is usually brighter, and I don't know, it could be just showing like the dark place that he was in like mentally as himself, and then he becomes Pete, which is like his fantasy, and he wants to be happy, and he is happy, and there's like lighter shots, and there's better like colors. It's not as dark. I don't know if that's anywhere correct, but it just kind of came to me as we were talking about it. So
Yeah. What other juxtaposition did you guys like think about between Pete and Fred? Because I know I definitely saw a lot of intense juxtaposition between the two of them.
um, I guess just I mean, obviously like all the characters, like him as Pete, and then there's the tie in between Alice and Renee as being like the same person. He just wants that like intense love that he can't have with Renee. Um, and then the gangster, Mr. Eddie and Dick Laurent, there's definitely a comparison there. Um,
Yeah. I was thinking about how um like Fred is kind of like there's a sex scene between Fred and Renee, and he can't come during it while they're having sex, and she starts patting him on the back and he's like, it's okay, it's okay. But then when he has this like fantasy that he's Pete, he's like this ladies man, and he's like you can definitely see a difference between partition partition Arquette's portrayal of Renee when she has sex with Fred, and Alice when she has sex with Pete. There's like after they have sex in that motel where Alice is wearing like that white, very ethereal outfit, she's like, I want more. And Pete says, me too. And I think that's kind of talking about his Fred's impotence and the fact that he like this young man who can make this woman want more of him, but also the fact that he can want more himself, since Fred can't come during sex and can't perform properly. It's not only the fact that he wants to pleasure Renee and be able to do that, but also the fact that he can't do it himself, and he wants more himself.
One thing I just wanted to like get off topic for a second and say like one thing that I love not only about this class in general, but like primarily the discussions that we have is by writing an essay, I feel like I learn a lot and I look at the film in an analytical way with a critical eye. But like the discussions, like I feel like I learned so much more. Like what you've been saying in this video has blown my mind and has made me understand the film in such like a way that I did not understand the film before.
Yeah. I definitely think rewatching it, and also I definitely think like I totally have a leg up on you guys. That's definitely unfair by being a Lynch fan and like knowing his other work, because I'm able to like see this movie and be like, I know what David Lynch does and what he's into and what he kind of um like the first time I watched Twin Peaks, which was the first real time I like fully devoted myself to like understanding what David Lynch likes to do in his craft. I was like, what?
I definitely want to watch that movie now. Looks
The first movie I ever watched of David Lynch is called uh Blue Velvet. And in Blue Velvet, there's this guy who's like this mobster-ish type, and he's hooked on he does not morphine, like laughing gas. And there's a scene in which he's having sex with this woman and he's like high on laughing gas. And it's like really intense. And I was like never watching anything by this guy ever again. Never. I was like in 9th grade. I was terrified. I was watching with my parents. There's lots of sex, lots of drugs. I was like, oh my God.
That's awful.
But like you really you really understand when there's a weird scene, like what it like there's you get so much more out of it when you kind of like understand what these weird scenes are and you're not as like freaked out about them, which I definitely was the first time I like watched David Lynch. I was
Yeah.
really freaked out.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie like gave me so much more than I thought it would.
Agreed.
Like I was going into this being like it's David Lynch, I love his movies, but some of them I haven't necessarily like gotten as much out of as this one. Like this was one that I literally have watched it twice in 24 hours and I want to watch it a third time already. Just because I feel like every time you watch it, you like learn something new, you understand something else, you kind of create this own world of like what you think the movie is. Another scene that I thought that was cool that I was wondering what you guys thought about was the scene with like where they're the moths in his lamp. Pete's lamp.
I didn't, and there was like the scene with like the spider crawling up the wall right before it. I didn't really know what to make of it. I was just at this point in the movie, I was just very confused. I just didn't know what was going on. So when they threw that in, I was just like, why? I have no ideas on that one.
Yeah. I felt like that was kind of when he was like when Pete was unraveling to be more of Fred. And I thought it was super interesting because you kind of felt like you were a moth stuck in the lamp. Or like you know the feeling when a bug flies right past your ear and you're like, oh my God, get off me, like get away from me. It like felt like they were like in my like I was there stuck in that lamp with them trying to get out and I couldn't. And I feel like that was really representative of like Pete because he was kind of like confused as to where he was. He didn't understand like how he ended up in the jail. I think he didn't understand like why everyone was acting that way towards him. Like his parents were acting funny. And I felt like I was him, like trapped in this, like I didn't fully understand what happened to him. So I thought that scene was really interesting.
That's a good way to think about that one. I hadn't even thought of that scene like in relation to the movie of like what it could mean. So I like that you brought that up because I kind of forgot about it.
One thing I liked about this movie was like I feel like it was a very serious movie, but it also was like kind of funny at moments. Like he wasn't afraid to like insert like some ironic scene. Like I loved the one on the highway when they were driving with the mobster and he was getting tailgated and he pulled him out, he ran him off the road and was pistol whipping him and being like, you know how many people die on this highway? As he's on the brink of death with guns shooting, like pointing at him. I just thought it was funny. He was like criticizing him for like almost putting someone's life in danger. But then it ended up being him putting him in danger. So I just thought like, I don't know, there was a lot of different like goofy things like when they're at the prison, the two guards, and they're talking about, they're like, wow, he doesn't look that good. That wife killer doesn't look good. And then they just start laughing hysterically out of nowhere. Like, and you're just kind of sitting there like, what? Like, is this supposed to be a funny movie? Or how am I supposed to be feeling right now?
Something that I was crying about is the scene where he like faints in the prison yard and they take him to see the doctor.
Uh-huh.
You guys noticed that was like a science classroom.
I didn't know.
That was 100% some random high school. Or go back to the movie and look at that scene. The floor, the ceiling lights, the cabinets. I was like, that was my physics classroom. That was my chemistry classroom. 100% they filmed. And like even the prison, like when they're walking him downstairs, I was like, this looks like a municipal building. Like he's about to be
Yeah.
taxed or something, or like I was like, this is such a funny like set.
Yeah.
But I was like laughing so hard because I paused and I was like, that is a classroom. This is not a jail. This is not an infirmary. That's a high school classroom.
That's actually so funny too, because like the doctor, the way he treated him, I was so confused the whole time. He like checked his pulse, he looked in his eye, he's like, "You're sleeping now?" And he's like, "No, I'm not sleeping." Gives him a myriad of like 4 different medicines. It'll be fine. Like, what kind of doctor are you? I was like thinking, like, oh, he's probably gonna have to like take some blood tests, like to figure out what's going on. No, doesn't need that.
Yeah, that scene was the whole prison part was really funny.
The whole
I
thing is
feel
so
like he was in prison. Something else that I want to quickly track back on, which is like a big part of the film for me, especially with like the theme of like the title and Lost Highway, was after that part where I presume that he was electrocuted that we're talking about, where like the blue lights flash and the light turns off. There's another scene of like the car traveling down the highway, and I thought that maybe that represents like lost souls, and like after he's died, he's trying to find his way along like the highway to heaven, to hell, to whatever it is. And the car pulls off the highway, and you see Pete standing there. And I took that as Fred's soul had found an inhabitant, and that was Peter. And it was almost like he died, and his soul was like looking to find something, and maybe like Pete was going through for him we don't know about that makes him like a candidate to like receive Fred's soul, and then that's why he like becomes possessed by him. So that's how I took it, of like why like Pete and Fred like link up, is like that scene of like Fred's soul is like on this journey and like finds Pete and like inhabits his body for a little while. Not necessarily like taking over like and like being Pete, but his soul is just resting inside of him, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Totally.
And then
Yeah.
at the end, when like he has sex with Alice and Alice is like, "You'll never have me," or whatever, he turns back to Fred. And I feel like that was to an understanding. And therefore he like turns back to Fred. And that's kind of like what wraps up the movie.
What do you think of the mystery man like shifting sides at the end of the movie? Like, because it always seemed like he was like evil and like was after Fred, but then at the end of the movie, he ends up killing was it Dick Laurent?
Yeah.
He was helping Fred, so I thought that was an interesting switch of like roles. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say on that.
Well, what I thought it was is like Lawson had briefly touched on it, like the fact that he was some sort of like soul collector or force. And I actually felt like in some ways this is kind of mind blowing. But the reason why at that moment he switches sides is because that's the only time we see Fred aware of his actions and in a non-psychotic state. You see him kill Dick Laurent. You see him go and tell himself Dick Laurent is dead. And this is kind of the only time in the whole movie where Fred is not in this psychosis trap and seeing what he sees, like he's actually seeing it, not seeing what he wants to see. And
Yeah,
so
so
I
like
feel
kind of
like
like a truth type thing.
yeah, because he like chases him down with the camera,
Mhm.
and it's kind of like I'm forcing you to look through the camera and see it how it actually is. And once Fred sees how it actually is and he actually kills Dick Laurent and realizes that he's kind of psychotic, that the mystery man kind of revokes his position of like forcing Fred to understand what's happening to himself.
And more evidence for that is just before he chases him down with the camera, he asked the mystery man, where's Alice? And the mystery man's like, there's no Alice, it's Renee. Like, it doesn't matter what she told you. And he's like, what the fuck is your name? And like that kind of like makes him real. Yeah.
For sure. That was like definitely because it's like, who the fuck are you? What are you doing? And what have you done with your life? And like recognize the fact that you are not who you think you are.
I think that's a good tie-up right there.
Yeah. Um, so should we do final thoughts on the movie now that we've talked and then
Definitely.
food? We did that last time and I kind of liked it.
I like that too.
I really liked it too. It was a good like conclusion wrap up.
I was confused going into this. I'm still confused. Maybe even a little more. But I think I have a better grasp on what David Lynch was going for with the film. Not necessarily that I fully understand like what the film is, but like maybe some tools that he was using in order to get us to try and get what the main message was behind it. I still like the movie a lot. I like it even more now that we had this conversation. And it makes me really want to watch the movie you're talking about where it's like this like purgatory. It's like what was it called? Black
Oh, Twin Peaks.
Twin Peaks.
It's a
Twin
TV
Peaks. I
show. It's
definitely
really
want to
good.
watch that.
Twin
And the
Peaks is
book
like
one.
my favorite TV show of all time. It's really good.
I'm gonna watch it. I'm gonna watch it.
That's even more blowing, I think, in some ways. Because you really get to know the characters and then everything is not what you think and it's totally like life changing.
I guess my final thoughts on the movie. I enjoyed it the first time I watched it, and I really want to see it again to get because I understand it better now a little bit. Not that I understand it because it was a very confusing film, but it was like I like the films that will make you think about things, and this definitely made me think about like why David Lynch did some things, why this was happening in the movie. It was a very interesting movie from that standpoint. So I kind of appreciate it even more, and then also just understanding David Lynch a little bit more, just through hearing what you have to say about him, helps me grasp kind of why he did some of the things he did. So I have a little bit more of an understanding of the movie now, and I definitely need to watch it again to see if I can really try to get a hold of what he was doing. So
Going into the movie, I had like my own thoughts about what David Lynch was going for, but then hearing everybody's like different perceptions and opinions on the film, it like kind of made me think, wow, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe this is what he was actually going for. And it was just interesting to be able to hear everybody's different like opinions on the film. So.
Yeah, I think one thing about David Lynch's films is like there will never be what he thought. It will always be what we think he thought. And I think that's like something that's like why this conversation was definitely more stimulating than some of the other movies that we've watched and talked about, because David Lynch really wants like you the viewer to decide what's happening. So I think that that's like I feel like this is definitely like one of our most like enriching and like interesting conversations that we've had. And I think that all of us like really learned a lot that we didn't realize coming into this just by like talking and like hearing, like even if someone said the teeniest thing, you're like, oh my God, now I think totally different about something else.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that made so much sense by you like asking that question or like bringing up that topic. And that's why I think these are like this was like a really great movie to do this with.
Totally.
David Lynch the movie kind of reminds me of like his style of wanting the viewer to interpret it their own way. Kind of reminds me of some of the stuff that Christopher Nolan does with like Inception and stuff like that. Like he doesn't reveal what he was actually going for, but he wants the viewer to have their own opinion and just kind of like throw it out there. Like this is like interpret it however you want, but I'm not gonna say what I was going for. And I thought that was interesting in this standpoint of the David Lynch film.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I might have all turned you to the dark side of being a David Lynch fan. Okay, so this was Manon Dejour, episode 2. Thank you for tuning in to our not so morning show anymore.
All right.
Bye bye.